My stepmom left her baby on my doorstep in a dirty towel during a snowstorm at 3 a.m. when I told her the baby now has hypothermia. Because of her, she laughed and said, "Couple hours in the cold won't cull him. He needs to learn independence." I didn't say a word. I just stared at her and decided I was about to turn her entire life upside down. I was 19 when my dad got remarried. His new wife Delana was already pregnant and pulled me aside during the wedding reception. I expected us to make small talk about the weather or something, but Delana had other plans. Suddenly, she whipped out a long black folder from the janitor's closet. In it was a detailed visitation calendar. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays were all marked as my days to mind her future child because Delana had spin class and work dinners. Weekends were split. I got mornings so they could sleep in. When I tried to explain that I had a life of my own to kick into gear, she just laughed. "Your little career can wait. This is a helpless baby we're talking about. Little Sammy needs you." She then rubbed her stomach as if her unborn son could hear me. EFF. "No, you and my father can leave me alone," I wanted to blurt out. But it was her wedding, which meant it was her day, not mine. So instead I said, "Let's talk about this later." But her and my dad never mentioned it again. Not the babysitting schedule, the pregnancy, nothing. I honestly thought they must have had a miscarriage or something, so I didn't bring it up either. I was sitting in my dorm room 3 months later, cramming for an exam when I got the call. It was Delana. "I'm outside," she exclaimed. I looked out the window to see Delana standing there waving, with what looked like a blanket in her arms. When I went downstairs, she handed baby Sammy to me. "It's Monday, which means it's your day," she said with a completely straight face. My face contorted with disgust. "Don't act like I didn't warn you about this. Anyway, I gotta run. My Sephora appointment isn't going to attend itself." Next thing I knew, she was running into her car and driving off. Little Sammy burst into tears and I knew I would get dorm complaints for his crying. So I was forced to drive back home just to take care of a child that wasn't even mine. For some reason, I decided to call my mom, thinking she could help, until I heard her words drunkenly slurring together. "You should really be thanking Delana. She's finally helping you act like a real woman." I didn't say a word before sighing and hanging up. I considered calling CPS, but as I looked into Sammy's big blue eyes, I knew he deserved better. So I settled for cradling him all night, and when 4 a.m. hit, I already knew I was going to fail my exam. Delana came by the next morning to pick him up. She tried to grab Sammy and drive off, but I stopped her. "Delana, this is your baby. I'm a teenager in college. I can't take care of Sammy for you." I didn't even mention that I failed the exam because of her. I didn't want her to feel bad. I just wanted her to stop relying on me to babysit. She nodded like she understood, but then a smile crept onto her face, the exact same one she had that day at the wedding. "Of course, no problem," she replied. Her voice dripped like honey, but I should have known it was laced with venom. That same day, I drove back to my college dorm, and aside from Facebook photos from our monthly FaceTime calls, I never saw Delana, Sammy, or my dad ever again. Until 3 months later, that is. I was doom scrolling through Instagram when my roommate sent me a photo. It was a photo of Sammy left at my door. He was completely unclothed and wrapped up in one of the dirtiest towels I'd ever seen. When I got there, my friend was standing over Sammy completely topless, desperately trying to warm him up with her jumper. You see, it was the middle of winter, and all the heating in our dorm was broken. I grabbed him and rushed over to the campus health center. His lips were completely blue, and his skin felt like ice. The nurse took one look, and her face went ghost white, and that's when I saw it. On the inside of his sock, there was a piece of paper sticking out. It was a note that read, "We had to catch a flight to redo our vows. Thanks for watching him. Love, Delana." My heart dropped. Within seconds, the nurses burst through the doors. They wrapped Sammy in special thermal blankets and hooked him up to monitors. One of them muttered, "Core temp is 94 degrees, which made them move even faster. So there I was, sitting in the waiting room spam calling my dad and his wife when a woman came up to me with a clipboard and a gentle smile. "I'm Evelyn from CPS. Are you available to talk?" My head was spinning and I followed her into her office. Turns out they had found finger-shaped bruises on his back, ones that only an adult could have left. I knew somehow Delana was behind this, and once everything was said and done, I planned on making her pay. Evelyn's eyes were kind but serious as she clicked her pen. I tried to focus on her questions, but my mind kept racing back to Sammy in that hospital bed. She asked about my relationship with Delana, about previous incidents, about the note. I explained everything from the wedding to the failed exam to finding him at my door. She took notes rapidly, occasionally looking up with concern. The hospital security guard knocked and entered, holding a tablet. He showed Evelyn something on the screen that made her eyebrows shoot up. She thanked him and turned back to me with a grave expression. The security footage from my dorm building had captured everything. At 3:47 a.m., Delana's car circled the building twice before she got out, checked for cameras, and left Sammy at my door. The timestamp showed she'd been gone for less than 30 seconds. My phone buzzed. Dad finally calling back. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, my hands shaking as I answered. Slot machines dinged in the background. He was at the Vegas airport, laughing about me being dramatic over babysitting. I tried explaining about Sammy being hospitalized, but he cut me off, saying Delana told him I was making things up for attention. The call ended with him warning me not to ruin their vacation. Back in Evelyn's office, she informed me that CPS would be taking temporary custody of Sammy. Relief and guilt washed over me simultaneously. As we walked back toward the pediatric ward, my phone lit up with notifications. My professor had emailed. Due to my missed exam and lack of communication, I was failing the course. No makeups, no exceptions. In the hospital cafeteria, I stared at my phone as more messages poured in. Mom texted accusing me of ruining Dad's happiness again. That word, again, made my stomach turn. She was referencing the time I'd told Dad about her drinking problem, which led to their divorce. Now apparently I was the villain once more. My roommate sent me screenshots. Delana had posted honeymoon photos on Instagram with the caption, "Living our best life," while Sammy fought for his life 3 states away. The timestamp showed she'd posted them an hour ago. I wanted to scream. Back at my dorm that evening, my roommate Sarah pulled me aside. She still had the baby monitor app on her phone from when she'd helped watch Sammy weeks ago. It had been recording audio from my room. Her face was pale as she played the the recording. Delena's voice came through clearly. Couple hours in the cold won't call him. He needs to learn independence. There was another voice too, male, agreeing with her. The next morning, I walked to the administration building, exhausted and overwhelmed. Dad had texted demanding I delete slanderous posts I'd never made. Delena was already spinning the narrative. The dean's office was my next stop. Someone had reported that I'd been keeping a baby in my dorm room against housing regulations. The disciplinary committee wanted to meet. Sitting in the quad after that disaster of a meeting, I called Sammy's pediatrician to check if they had any information. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. Apparently, Delena had added me as an authorized pickup person 6 months ago, long before I'd ever agreed to anything. This had been planned. Evelyn called me back to the hospital that afternoon. She had difficult news. The medical records showed this wasn't Sammy's first hypothermia incident. There was a November admission, barely 2 months ago, with a different caregiver listed. The pattern was becoming clear. Delena had been shopping around for people to abandon her baby with. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She's done this before. Please help. The sender identified herself as Chloe, Delena's 16-year-old sister. But before I could respond, the messages disappeared and the number blocked me. Whatever Chloe knew, someone didn't want her sharing it. That evening, Mom called, hammered again. She rambled about family loyalty and how I was acting just like I did with cousin Tyler. My blood ran cold. Tyler. I hadn't thought about that in years. When I was 8, our 15-year-old cousin had died under suspicious circumstances while staying with our family. Mom had been watching him. The death was ruled accidental, but whispers followed our family for years. I checked Facebook between classes the next day. Dad's relationship status had changed to "it's complicated," while Delena's still showed "happily married." The cracks were starting to show, but I doubted it had anything to do with concern for Sammy. In the cafeteria, I noticed classmates avoiding my table. An email had gone out from campus security about a dangerous situation in the dorms involving child abandonment. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. 3 people I'd studied with for months suddenly had somewhere else to be. Walking to my car that afternoon, I noticed the same woman for the 3rd time that day, Marissa, according to her work badge, which showed a CPS logo, different department than Evelyn's. She smiled and waved like we were old friends. I later learned she was Delena's best friend from high school. After each random encounter, she pulled out her phone and typed furiously. At the bank ATM, trying to figure out how to pay for food now that I'd lost my campus job, I noticed something odd in my account. Weekly $500 deposits from Dad labeled child care. Delena had been collecting money for babysitting services I'd never agreed to. 6 months of payments, $12,000 total. Evelyn called with an update. Sammy was being placed in foster care, but there was good news. The family was experienced with special needs children. Then she mentioned the name. The foster mother was Delena's cousin Janet. My heart sank. Even in the system, Delena's web of connections was protecting her. The campus counseling center reached out. Someone had filed an anonymous concern report about my mental stability. They strongly suggested I take a stress leave from school. When I asked who'd filed the report, they couldn't say. But the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. At a coffee shop near campus, I met with Jake, Dad's lawyer friend. He offered to mediate if I'd apologize publicly for the misunderstanding. He painted it as a win-win. Delena would drop any potential charges, and I could move on with my life. The threat was implicit but clear. My boyfriend of 6 months broke up with me via text as I walked up my apartment stairs. His parents had heard about the situation and thought I was unstable. He couldn't risk being associated with someone involved in child abandonment charges. I sat on the stairs and laughed bitterly. Delena's narrative was winning. That night, I discovered Delena's GoFundMe page. Help Us Fight False Accusations had already raised $3,000. The donor list read like Dad's company directory. His colleagues were literally funding Delena's campaign against me. Each donation came with supportive comments about what a devoted mother she was. The next morning brought a new low. Mom showed up at my dorm, hammered and screaming about her ungrateful daughter. Students filmed as she accused me of trying to destroy our family again. Security had to escort her off campus. The videos were online within an hour. Desperate for answers, I went to our family storage unit. Maybe there was something in old photos or documents that could help. Instead, I found my childhood diary. But something was wrong. There were entries I didn't remember writing, pages about how excited I was to have a new baby brother, and how I couldn't wait to babysit all the time. The handwriting was close to mine, but not quite right. Delena had been planning this for longer than I'd imagined. The forged diary entries made my hands shake. I photographed each page with my phone, then noticed something else tucked behind the diary. A manila envelope with my name on it. Inside were medical forms from a pediatrician's office, all filled out in my handwriting, or what looked like my handwriting. Authorization forms, insurance paperwork, even vaccination consent forms dated months before Sammy was born. Back at the laundromat near campus, I watched Delena's latest Instagram stories while my clothes tumbled in the dryer. She'd returned early from her honeymoon renewal, posting tearful reunion videos with Sammy at Janet's house. In every clip, Sammy screamed and reached away from her, his little face red and distressed. The comment section overflowed with sympathy for the devoted mother separated from her baby by false accusations. The next morning at the grocery store, I overheard 2 women from Dad's neighborhood discussing the situation. According to them, I'd volunteered to watch Sammy full-time, then forgotten about him when partying got in the way. The story had morphed completely. One woman mentioned she'd heard it directly from Delana at their book club. My laptop had been acting strangely, so I took it to campus tech support. The technician's face grew concerned as he ran diagnostics. Someone had been accessing my computer remotely. He pulled up my search history, showing searches I'd never made. How to make baby sick for attention. Hypothermia symptoms in infants. Can you fake bruises on a baby? The searches dated back 3 months. My stomach dropped as I realized the depth of Delena's planning. At my next doctor's appointment, the receptionist at the pediatric office next door struck up a conversation. She mentioned casually that I'd been asking about infant hypothermia effects months ago, during a visit that never happened. When I tried to correct her, her, she pulled up their computer records. There I was, signed in and everything. The appointment notes detailed my concerning questions about cold exposure in babies. I started documenting everything, but even that felt futile. My neighbor showed me his Ring doorbell footage from the night Sammy was abandoned. Delena's car was clearly visible at 3 a.m., but the angle didn't capture her actually leaving the baby. Without that crucial moment, the footage proved nothing except that she'd been in the area. The family court treated my concerns as jealousy-driven harassment when I tried to file a report. The clerk barely looked up from her computer, dismissing my evidence folder without opening it. She'd already heard about the troubled stepdaughter making false accusations. I left feeling invisible. That evening, I remembered Sammy's patient portal from when I'd taken him to appointments. The password still worked. I downloaded his complete medical history from the public library computer, not trusting my compromised laptop. The records painted a disturbing picture. Documentation of bruising went back months, always explained away as active baby or possible self-inflicted. Photos showed the same pattern of marks in the same locations. At FedEx, I printed everything, creating multiple copies. The employee helping me noticed the medical photos and quickly looked away. I could see the judgment in his eyes. Another person who'd probably seen Delena's social media campaign. My aunt called while I sat in my car afterward. She'd always been supportive, but her tone had changed. Delena had promised to help with her mortgage if she'd talk sense into me. My aunt tried to convince me to apologize and move on. When I refused, she sighed and said she couldn't afford to take sides. Another ally lost. Late that night, I discovered a fake Instagram account in my name. It had been active for months, posting in mommy groups about being a nightmare stepdaughter who resented her father's new family. The post dated back to Delena's wedding day. Screenshots showed me complaining about having to babysit, making threats, expressing hatred for the unborn baby. None of it was real, but the account had hundreds of interactions from real mothers offering Delena support and advice. The next development came through official mail. CPS was fast-tracking reunification, citing Delena's stable two-parent home versus my status as a single teen with mental health concerns. The hearing was set for next week. A notice on the courthouse bulletin board made it public information. Everything culminated when I arrived at work. My manager called me into the break room, where a process server waited. Dad, Mom, and Delena had filed a joint restraining order. I was to stay 500 feet away from Sammy at all times. My own parents had legally barred me from protecting a baby in danger. My manager apologetically informed me that I was being let go. They couldn't have someone under investigation working near the cash register. When I asked who had called, she reluctantly admitted it was Delena, concerned about customer safety. I packed my things in silence. Jake appeared at his office the next day with an offer. Delena would drop everything if I publicly apologized and agreed to counseling. She'd even pay my tuition and give me $10,000 to start fresh somewhere else. All I had to do was admit I'd been confused, jealous, and acting out. The paperwork was already drawn up. I refused. Jake's expression hardened as he slid another document across his desk. Dad had removed me as beneficiary from everything. His will, life insurance, even the college fund he'd promised. Delena smirked from the doorway where she'd been listening. She knew she'd already won. Back at the public library, I spread out bank statements I'd managed to access. Phone records showed Mom had been with Delena during the abandonment, not at home as she'd claimed. The timeline proved she'd lied to everyone. Every family member now supporting Delena had received money from Dad's retirement fund in the past month. They'd been bought. The realization hit me as I sat alone in my apartment that night. My supposed allies had been feeding information to Delena all along. Every move I made, she'd anticipated. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, she'd countered. I'd been playing a rigged game from the start. Chloe reached out through a mutual friend, asking to meet at the mall. She looked terrified, clutching a photo of Sammy while tears streamed down her face. She had to choose between helping me or keeping her home. Their parents had threatened to kick her out if she testified. She chose safety but whispered one thing before leaving. Check Delena's first marriage records. I decided to change tactics. At Best Buy, I purchased several small recording devices. If I couldn't prove the past, maybe I could expose the present. I practiced looking defeated, rehearsing apologies in the mirror. Let Delena think she'd broken me. The recording of Mom admitting she would have left Sammy outside too came during a drunken phone call. I edited out my questions, leaving only her damning statements. Posted from McDonald's Wi-Fi to avoid detection. The audio went viral in local mom groups within hours. Through a paralegal friend, I obtained Delena's ex-husband's sealed custody records. The patterns were identical. Bruising, neglect, false accusations against anyone who tried to help. Their daughter had suffered the same treatment. But within days of sharing this information with me, my friend was transferred to Phoenix after an anonymous bar complaint threatened her license. The defamation lawsuit arrived while I watched Sammy's foster home from across the street. Delena and Dad were suing for emotional distress, loss of reputation, and harassment. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and legal aid mysteriously had no funding available for cases this complex. Desperation drove me to confront Delena at Target. She was shopping in the baby aisle, picking out clothes for Sammy. When I approached, she immediately started screaming about assault, throwing herself backward into a display. Security cameras captured her performance, but not my actual distance from her. I was arrested within minutes. The night in jail felt endless. Delena posted her victim statement before I was even processed, complete with photos of her injuries from the Target incident. By morning, I was released to find an eviction notice on my apartment door. My landlord couldn't risk having a dangerous tenant. From a motel room, I answered a call that changed everything. Sandra, Delena's ex-mother-in-law, had found my contact information. Her voice was steady but filled with pain as she shared her story. Delena had destroyed her son. She warned me not to let the same thing happen to me. In Sandra's kitchen the next day, she revealed the full horror. Her grandson Max, now 5, had permanent developmental delays from a fall at 14 months, the same age as Sammy. The medical records she'd saved showed patterns identical to what I'd found. Her son had fought for custody for 2 years before taking his own life, leaving a note blaming himself for trusting Delena. Delana. Delana found out about our meeting within hours. Her social media post about me harassing grieving families for attention included a photo of Sandra's house, taken from across the street. She'd been watching. The comment section filled with outrage at my cruelty. Dad's text arrived while I sat in Sandra's driveway. He announced Delana was pregnant again and demanded congratulations. When I didn't respond, he sent another, "Why are you destroying us?" The manipulation was transparent now, but it still hurt. I agreed to a local news interview, hoping to share my side. The segment aired edited beyond recognition, painting me as vengeful and unstable. They'd used old social media photos to make me look like a party girl who resented responsibility. Delana's tearful response interview aired immediately after. The biggest shock came at the county clerk's office. Sammy's birth certificate didn't list Dad as the father. The space was blank, but Delana had added Dad to all other documents. He had no actual legal rights to the child he'd been paying to support. The implications were staggering. An email from CPS revealed they were expediting reunification due to Delana's pregnancy complications from stress. The hearing was moved up to 72 hours away. Time was running out, and I'd just discovered the key to everything. Piecing together records at a diner, I identified Sammy's biological father, Mark, Delana's boss. Bank records showed he'd been paying her monthly amounts that matched child support, while she'd also been collecting from Dad. She'd been double-dipping, defrauding both men while endangering her baby. Sandra helped me practice a groveling public apology. If I couldn't win legally, maybe I could get close enough to gather more evidence. We rehearsed in her garage until I could cry on cue, looking properly defeated and remorseful. The family dinner happened at Dad's house. I delivered my practiced apology while secretly recording. Delana couldn't resist gloating, describing how she'd left Sammy outside to teach you a lesson about responsibility. She detailed her entire plan, confident in her victory. My hope crashed when the lawyer I consulted explained the recording was inadmissible. We lived in a two-party consent state, which Delana had known all along. She'd confessed freely, knowing it couldn't be used against her. Every word was worthless in court. The emergency injunction arrived while I was getting gas. Delana claimed my stalking was causing miscarriage risks to her new pregnancy. A judge granted it immediately. I had 48 hours before being banned from the entire county. The walls were closing in. Sandra offered her car and credit cards in her garage that night. She pulled out Max's medical files, thick folders documenting years of suffering. Someone had to save Sammy before he ended up the same way. We both knew what that might require. Mom called from a truck stop payphone, begging me to leave town. Her words slurred with drink and fear as she insisted Delana would hurt the new baby if I didn't stop. It was the first time she'd admitted Delana was dangerous, but it came with a plea for me to give up. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "She's planning something. Get medical records to judge now." The urgency in her message was clear. Time had run out for legal channels. Using Chloe's volunteer badge, I entered the hospital after hours. The records room was exactly where she'd described, the silent alarm disabled as promised. My hands shook as I searched through files, knowing every second increased the risk of being caught. The assessment was buried deep in the system, a recommendation against reunification from a child development specialist. It detailed concerns about Sammy's safety, patterns of abuse, and Delana's psychological unsuitability as a caregiver. This document could change everything, but it had been hidden from the court. More discoveries followed. 3 different daycare workers had filed complaints about unexplained bruising on Sammy. All 3 had withdrawn their reports after private meetings with Delana. She'd worked at all 3 daycares at different times, targeting vulnerable families each time. The pattern was clear and damning. The hospital parking garage felt eerily quiet as I clutched the stolen documents. Each page revealed another piece of Delana's systematic abuse. 3 different daycares, 3 sets of traumatized children, 3 investigations mysteriously dropped. The pattern stretched back years before Sammy was even born. She'd been perfecting her craft, learning exactly how much harm she could inflict without triggering permanent intervention. My hands trembled as I drove to the 24-hour FedEx. The overnight envelope to the judge felt impossibly light for something carrying so much weight. I included everything: the hidden assessment, the daycare complaints, the medical photos showing identical bruise patterns across multiple children. As the package disappeared into the Dropbox, I whispered a prayer that it would arrive before tomorrow's hearing. The next morning brought disaster. I watched from across the street as police cars surrounded the high school. Chloe emerged in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears. Hospital security had reviewed their footage overnight. She looked directly at me through the crowd of gawking students, mouthing a single word before the officers pushed her head down into the patrol car. That word haunted me as I sat frozen in Sandra's borrowed car, watching my only remaining ally disappear. The choice tore at me: turn myself in to help Chloe, or stay free for the hearing. Every instinct screamed to help her, but her mouthed word echoed in my mind. She'd sacrificed herself for Sammy. Abandoning that sacrifice would make it meaningless. I started the engine and drove away. The image of her tear-stained face burned into my memory. My phone buzzed with a text from Delana. The message made my blood run cold. She thanked me for the evidence, claiming Chloe had already admitted I'd forced her to help. Every move I'd made to save Sammy had given Delana more ammunition. The motel room felt like a cage as I packed frantically, knowing I was now technically a fugitive but had no choice except to attend the hearing. Sandra managed to bail Chloe out, but the damage was done. Chloe's family pressed charges to silence her, threatening to disown her if she testified. Another witness neutralized. Another victory for Delana. The drive toward the courthouse felt like driving into a trap, but Sammy's life hung in the balance. The courthouse parking lot was packed with news vans when I arrived. The local media had latched onto the story of a custody dispute gone wrong. As I walked toward the building, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. This was the same courthouse where cousin Tyler's death had been ruled accidental all those years ago. History had a way of repeating itself in the worst possible ways. Dad waited on the courthouse steps, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. He blocked my path, delivering an ultimatum: leave now, or he'd testify about my supposed mental instability. The threat hung between us as snow began to fall, eerily similar to the night Sammy was abandoned. I met his eyes and spoke the truth he didn't want to hear. We'd both lose Sammy if I left. He knew Delana was dangerous. The knowledge was written in every line of his face, even as he refused to acknowledge it. Suddenly, the fire alarm shrieked through the building. People poured out onto the courthouse lawn in a chaotic evacuation. Through the crowd, I spotted a man in an expensive suit approaching with a briefcase. Mark, Delana's boss, had arrived with his attorney. Under the courthouse awning, protected from the falling snow, he made his announcement. He wanted his son. DNA test today. His lawyer produced a folder of documents. The papers rustled in the wind as he showed them to anyone who would look. Text messages from Delana admitting Sammy wasn't Dad's child. Threats of blackmail if Mark didn't keep paying. Evidence of her double-dipping scheme, collecting money from both men while neither knew about the other. The crowd's attention shifted to Delana as she pushed through the evacuated masses. In her struggle to reach Mark, something shifted under her coat. The padding she'd been using to fake her pregnancy tumbled out onto the snowy ground. Everyone saw it. The elaborate deception literally falling apart in front of dozens of witnesses. She tried to run, but her panic made her lash out. Sandra stepped forward to block her path, and Delana struck her with her purse. Security officers tackled her in the parking lot, her screams echoing off the courthouse walls. The judge emerged from the building, still in his robes despite the evacuation. He declared the custody proceedings would restart completely, pending DNA testing to establish actual parentage. The hearing I'd risked everything to attend was suddenly moot. Everything would begin again from square one. Dad sank onto the snowy courthouse steps, his world crumbling around him. He'd given Delana everything, his money, his trust, his family relationships, all for a child that was never his. He wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, just sat there staring at the snow accumulating on his shoes. The police arrived to sort out the assault. As they reviewed security footage and took statements, more evidence surfaced. The edited recording I'd posted of Mom's drunken confession had been traced back to our phone call. She was arrested for false testimony, screaming about how I'd ruined everything as they put her in the patrol car. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd finally told the truth while hammered, and it had destroyed her. Inside the courthouse, away from the chaos, another revelation emerged. A teenage girl stepped forward, clutching a baby carrier. Emma, just 17 years old, had been watching the news coverage. She was Sammy's birth mother. Delana had bought him from her for $50,000 when Emma was desperate and homeless. The transaction had been disguised as an adoption, but Emma had never signed away her rights properly. I met Emma's eyes across the courthouse hallway. She had the same haunted look I'd seen in Sandra's photos of her son, in Chloe's face as she was arrested, in my own reflection lately. We were all members of the same horrible club, people whose lives Delana had systematically destroyed. The recognition passed between us without words. Sandra found me in the courthouse bathroom, where I'd retreated to process everything that had just happened. She took my hand with the firm grip of someone who understood survival. Her promise was simple but profound. Both Sammy and Emma would get justice now. The system that had failed so many times before would have to work this time. Too many eyes were watching.